Welcome, listeners, to another dramatic-ish reading. This time for Stones to Abbigale by Onision. I'm proud of myself, though. I managed to get through all of these recordings without corpsing once. Granted, it's only the first chapter, but still, it's an achievement for me. No guarantee I'm going to be able to withhold my laughter throughout all of the other chapters, so because, ooh, boy, what I've heard happens from those chapters. Oh boy. Oh no. But without further ado, chapter 1 for Stones to Abbigale. Okay, I can do this. Chapter 1. I was asleep until I met her. When I finally woke, I learned the meaning of perfect imperfection. I've always been the type of person to focus on stars as we spin beneath them, the cool breeze on a sunny day, scattered patches of green under my feet, the world around me, often forgetting to even glance at the one within. I had remained emotionally unexplored for so much of my life. It's painful knowing some can go an entire lifetime without understanding their own heart, an internal lock, waiting for the right key to change everything. It was the first Monday of November. I opened my eyes, blinded by my recently painted wall-to-wall white room. Even my bed frame, constructed of purely metal, was painted white. It bounced off the walls, causing my eyelids to desperately clamp together. Painting my room like this was a clear act of subtle, self-inflicted psychological torture. I was going through another phase, from darkness to light and repeat. Seemed like the story of my life. My mom could see the darker colors were depressing me. I felt comforted by them, but found there were good aspects of both extremes. I was happy to visit either side. They are both so simple. But right now, the intense light bouncing from wall to wall felt like it was ripping my mind in two. My mom didn't wake me. My alarm clock sat on my dresser with no explanation for its failure to function. The clock only illuminated a blank stare with 8:17 written all over its face. While entirely robotic, I imagined the clock to have the dumbest possible expression, one complimenting its failure to behave in any way outside its random glitch-infested nature. In the reflection of its plastic face, I could see myself unconsciously making the dumb expression I was imagining the clock to have. I laughed in my casual, dorky tone, and began to get ready to leave home. Without breakfast, I left for school with a bogus note in hand to idealistically explain my tardiness. I think most of my teachers were too exhausted to worry about small variances in our appearance from time to time. With how low their pay likely was, I imagine there was very few rules most teachers cared about. It was another cold day in Lakewood. The wind hit my eyes, forcing tears to form in the corners as I sped along the sidewalk at a no doubt unreasonable speed. I passed Lauren and Raymond walking the opposite direction, no doubt headed toward the nearby church, where all the students go to smoke, make out, and hide out till school ends. They seemed so childish as they held hands and smiled excitedly, as if they had gotten away with some tremendous crime. Mr. Hanson, my heavy-set middle-aged history teacher, rolled his eyes as I walked into class. "James, talk to me after class," he said quickly, looking away from me, as if I were an undervalued employee who was barely important enough to make eye contact with, let alone deliver a full sentence to. "I have a note," I said. He ignored me, and continued his lecture on yet another topic that would not only be completely useless later in life, but wasn't even relevant for even a few seconds after the words left his mouth. There was only 15 minutes left in the class, but I felt it would be more stimulating to integrate myself into the room to yet again study my classmates' behavior than to sit in a hall watching the rows of scum-covered tiles inevitably slide off the decaying walls. For as long as I can remember, I've enjoyed seeing how people move around and talk to each other like they're all animals at the zoo. I would try to deliver a more accurate analogy if I felt there was one, but so many of them seemed incredibly unaware of themselves, just living life as if it were some generic, predefined routine. Sometimes I felt like an alien who had a VIP pass to submerge myself in primitive human culture just for entertainment. I sense everything I can take in around me, the seemingly limitless audible tones, tremors in the voices of growing children rang in my ears. In studying people, I found myself gradually learning to literally feel the various personality types I encountered. I hyperanalyzed every inconsistent smell, the seemingly random clothing styles, freckles, and assorted hairlines filled my mind with questions, trying to rationalize and understand what sequence of events led them to decide who they would become. I took favor of categorizing most everyone around me. The socially inept know-it-all, the dumb attention-seeking drama kid, and the bleach-blonde bimbo who gets overly defensive at the slightest hint of criticism. Then there were the kids who just hoped no one noticed them at all. There was so much to be seen, to be considered and organized in my mind. Class had just ended, so I walked over to Mr. Hanson's desk and placed a tardy note down in passing. As I walked out with the rest of my class, he called after me, "James, we still need to talk." I responded, but continued to walk outside the room. "I have to be early to my next class. Let's talk tomorrow." I walked quickly down the hall toward my art class, which was awkwardly placed in a trailer outside my clearly poorly funded high school. On my way to the class, a fight had already broken out between two jocks who, no doubt, both had controlling, iron-fisted fathers who brainwashed them into believing conflicts between men are best resolved with the bloodying of their fists. These kinds of men plagued my mind with wonder. I could not conceive a scenario in which they could justify their primitive and pointless mentalities. Yet they would always continue to perpetuate their self-destructive attitudes as if it offered the slightest legitimate benefit. Most everyone nearby crowded around the fight. None of them likely cared who was winning, what it was about, or how far it went. All they ever seemed to show concern for was their own amusement, always excited to see violence without having to pull out their wallets to pay for it. As the sounds of flesh collided fist to cheek and chest, quickly followed by the howls from the surrounding students, they would scream, "Ooh!" as if it were sincerely delightful to witness creatures like themselves suffer and fall apart before their eyes. Even if I had time to stop, I never really took pleasure in seeing strangers hurt each other. Most all fights seemed avoidable, and were often initiated for a senseless reason. I know, you could say that it's more complicated than that. I would like to think it were as well. But reality trumps the way I wish things would be. There's no sense in fighting it, when doing so rarely helps anyone. As I approached my next class, the image of Abby's face illuminated the neon walls of my mind like a projector teasing a theater screen with fleeting moments of depth and purpose. Ever since I met her, she had occupied a part of my consciousness. Whenever I wasn't near her, I missed her to an unrealistic extent. You could call my longing sad, especially considering we had barely talked. She just had a strange effect on me, one no doubt similar to a willful addiction. There are people in life which we pass by on a daily basis, barely aware of their existence. But on an exceptionally rare occasion, you can find a person who fills an area inside your little world you didn't even realize needed filling. As I walked up the creaking stairs into my art class trailer, I could see Abby was sitting at her shared desk, alone. Same makeup, hairstyle, and general appearance I'd thought about repeatedly over the last couple days. She was drawing pictures on her blue-lined paper, distracting herself from the cold that filled the oddly glowing room. I smiled slightly, trying not to be too obvious, and sat down on my chilled metal chair, positioned a few seats to the left in front of her. Glancing over, I could see she hadn't moved at all. I felt like she didn't even notice me come in. I wanted to inspire some acknowledgement of my existence from Abby, so I opened my mouth to greet her when my fingers brushed up against freshly smeared gum under my desk. "Ew!" I shouted out on impulse. She looked up at me with a blank expression. Bursting into the room came a group of boys. "Dude, I think John's done, bro." One of the other boys laughed, saying, "We won't see them for a week at least." I looked back at Abby to see she also didn't react to their outburst. Strangely, knowing that her apathy was generalized and impersonal gave me comfort. Her influence on how I felt was obviously dangerous, but I didn't care, as no matter how fond I was of the idea that I was not of the world, I knew my place and had no real interest in pretending otherwise. Jason, one of the boys energetically praising the fight they had just seen, sat in his seat next to Abby. I smirked, watching her shoulders shift away from him. Her body language sent a loud message that she had the same impression of Jason as I did. He was just another moron, placed on this earth to live his life completely unexamined, a pawn that had no awareness of its own role, let alone that it was just another tiny component within a massive, unstoppably twisted game. I know it sounds morbid and condescending, but my attitude was just something that naturally developed the more I studied human behavior. I would be more optimistic, but I find doing so would be like walking into a room with no windows and turning out the light. If you refuse to see the world around you for what it is, you're just wasting your eyes. Art class was about to begin. My teacher, Miss Stanley, who looked like she should have retired a ridiculous 30 years ago, approached the front of the room talking about how art is sacred. She also discussed the random object she had us all draw the previous school day, and ironically graded it by using her own narrow-minded definition of art. I always wondered how teachers could even attempt objectively grading art. Is there any logic behind validating a form of self-expression using a cold, black and white mathematical system? "Today I'm going to place you with partners," Miss Stanley said as she pulled out sheets of paper outlining the activities to come. "To keep this simple, I'm going to partner you with the person you are currently assigned to share a desk with," she said. I sighed. knowing I was bound to be paired up with Alex, a guy I had specifically asked to be seated away from ever since he peed in a jar literally right next to me under our desk, acting like he was so cool for publicly exposing himself while simultaneously urinating. It happened weeks ago, and I still can't figure out what kind of crazy it takes for you to, in the presence of people you barely know but have to see on a daily basis, pee in a jar held in your hand just beneath your desk in the middle of a classroom. What then? You show it off like you will be praised and accepted as if it were an accomplishment? Alex, despite being borderline mental, was one of my least favorite people to study. I couldn't help but feel there was some defect in his mind that invalidated the point of conducting a thorough analysis of him. He was completely irrelevant when considering the realities of normal human behavior. As I was off on a tangent in my own mind, I heard a familiar voice ring out, one that inspired the very same emotion you experience when a song you had forgotten you loved randomly plays in the background of your daily life. "Can I be paired up with James?" Her voice was just as I remembered. Despite her having not spoken in class in some time, she hadn't changed a note. Abby had interrupted the teacher just to partner with me, but I asked myself if it was really just to work with me or just to get away from Jason. The teacher, looking irritated but understanding Abby's discomfort with Jason, responded, "Alex and Jason, you'll be partners. James, switch seats with Jason." "Thank you," Abby said with a slight smile. With a cocky grin, Jason stood up and in a comedic fashion smelled his armpit. "Wow, I didn't know I smelled that bad," Jason said as he walked over to sit by Alex. Approaching Abby was no doubt a way scarier act in my mind than it was to everyone around me. I felt like my head was burning from the inside out. Nevertheless, I continued to remind myself that her public outcry to partner with me could have meant nothing. I sat down next to her and did all I could not to turn into a complete dork on her. She reached out and grabbed the project outline that was being passed out. Miss Stanley began to read a description of the assignment. "Today you will both be taking something meaningful, but expendable, from your own homes." Miss Stanley looked up and emphasized, "That you own," then looked back down at her paper. "You will tear these items apart here in class. You will then take these items and, using the adhesives, staples, and the strings available in class, find a way to create something new out of those possessions." She looked up and said in a low voice sounding somewhat like Dracula, "Two will become one." Jason raised his hand, objecting. "All due respect, Miss Stanley, I'm not breaking something of mine for this class," she replied, putting her hands on her hips. "That's fine, Jason. We'll supply you with toilet paper rolls. We have plenty of extras around here." Jason suddenly looked disturbed and sarcastically spouted, "Freaking great." Miss Stanley asked, "Are you sure? Your grade shouldn't suffer that much if you two just take Alex's piss jar and tape it to a toilet paper roll. You're already failing this class." Jason couldn't believe what she had just said, and Alex maintained an awkward, frozen facial expression with his mouth slightly open in his normal, weirdo, somewhat robotic fashion. "Oh my God," Abby whispered under her breath with a slight smirk. I grinned uncontrollably. Just seeing her amused was amazing to me. I could hear a scream in the back of my mind, reminding me my dorkiness and borderline obsession that was escaping through my face. It's not that I couldn't help being in awe of Abby and basically every little thing she did. I simply didn't want to change how I felt. In a way, she was like your favorite song or book. You could pretend not to like it, and in time, with the right mental coaching, maybe you would sincerely dislike it. But life just felt so much better, embracing your condition entirely, letting all your nerdy admiration flow freely. Miss Stanley continued, "If there's anyone else who has an issue, please take it up with my 1-800 number, which is..." She put her hand up to the air, signaling the students to react, but only a couple kids replied aloud with her catchphrase. 1-800-boo-hoo, they mumbled. She continued, "Good. Now for the rest of class, please work with your partner on what you plan to bring and draw up a prototype sketch of what you feel your final piece of art will look like." Miss Stanley walked to the back of her room and sat down at her 1950s looking rust-infested desk. I would always laugh internally when I looked at the old thing. Maybe it was my way of coping with the fact I attended one of the most run-down schools in the state. "What are you going to bring, James?" Abby asked. It was amazing hearing my name pass her lips, but I had no time to think. If I didn't respond right away, she would think I was totally awkward. "I have no idea," I responded. Smiling, she said, "I'm going to bring my hamster cage." I asked, "Did he die or something?" She laughed. "No, I never got one. The cage was just a gift from my dad." "Your dad didn't get you a hamster for the cage?" I asked. She paused and started to lose her smile. At the first sign of her smile fading, I felt a crushing pressure in my chest. "Hopefully you can find something that will work with that," she said. I couldn't help but feel like a total jerk, despite not even knowing what I did wrong. I had the overwhelming urge to fix how she felt, so I took a gamble. "Well, I could always bring that weird vibrating thing my mom hides in her drawers all wrapped up in a cloth," I said. She busted out laughing hysterically as a huge grin filled my face. I was so happy I could get her to smile again. "You, James." She continued to laugh as the extent of my grin began to stress my cheeks. I couldn't remember a time when I was this obvious about how I felt. Abby's laughing trailed off and she paused. Turning to me, she said, You didn't actually... Your mom's?" I responded, "Nah, I wouldn't know anything about that, but I'm glad it made you laugh." She responded, returning to a soft laugh, "You're more goofy than I thought, James." I sat next to her, looking at my fingers interlaced in front of me. My wide smile relaxed, but still filled my cheeks with warmth. As class came to a close, Abby patted me on my arm. I turned and she handed me a note. Instinctively, I put it in my pocket and said, "See you tomorrow." She just smiled and walked away. On my way to my next class, I opened a note. I didn't understand why, but it read, Niseone. Not knowing what to make of it, and with little time, I stuffed it back in my pocket to look over later. Not feeling like skating home, I got on the bus to see all the normal rejects and misfits waiting. Davis, a short and scrawny kid who had been my best friend since middle school, despite being one grade behind me, excitedly waved me over. "James, nice to see you." he said, in seemingly the dorkiest way possible. I smiled as he stood up, giving me the window seat, knowing very well by then that I preferred it. As I sat down, I began looking out the window, analyzing the little humans running left and right to get on their buses. Something reached out and caught the corner of my eye. I immediately shifted my head to see what it was, and quickly realized it was Abby, standing in the parking lot by some beat-up sedan. "What you looking at, James?" Davis asked. Without hesitation, I began to respond. "Oh, it's Abby. She's in my art." My heart sank as I witnessed a boy I barely knew, named Seth, walk up and kiss Abby on the lips. "James?" Davis said, but by that point his voice was a faint echo. In the darkness, my mind instantaneously lost itself in. I felt like after a life of numbness, I was finally about to feel true warmth for the first time, only to have it all taken away in an instant, leaving me hopeless in the shadows, alone, once again. I looked down at my knees, feeling as if I lost all muscle control in my neck. "Are you okay?" Davis asked. I responded with hesitation. I'm just stupid." "No, you're not. You're one of the coolest guys I know," Davis replied. I continued my silence as he offered words of encouragement. "Okie dokie. Well, you're awesome and should be super happy. So if you want to talk, I'm your buddy, so I'm here to talk." I was too focused on the conflict raging in my mind to hear anyone at that point. I couldn't think about anything but Seth kissing Abby the entire trip home. That night my mom was literally just serving lentil beans she prepared on her crock pot for the billionth time. A fair exaggeration, but still, it was excessive to say the least. My sister was behaving as she usually did at the dinner table, talking about how stupid she thought school was, and how she couldn't wait for college. "How was work, Mom?" I asked, trying to keep my mind off the haunting images looping in my mind. "Well, no one at work respects me or listens to me, and I generally can't stand it. But, we still have food on the table," she said in a stern tone. My sister barked as food flew out of her mouth. "Well, at least it's not high school. I'm learning how to be a successful person from a bunch of low-income losers," my mom replied. "Whatever your teachers are, they have full-time jobs, which is more than what a lot of people can say." My mom gave my sister Lisa a disappointed look. Lisa was well known for showing little respect for hard-working people. To her, it didn't matter how much you gave back to society. It only mattered how much money you made. After the rerun of lentil soup, I washed the dishes per my mom's orders and headed to the shower. I sat on the floor of the tub thinking about Abby, barely feeling the water as it hit my chest. I was so consumed with what I had seen that I had completely forgotten the note until that moment. I quickly reached over to my pants resting on the toilet. I had hoped I read it wrong the first time and that it would make sense with a second look, only to see it read exactly what I had gathered in my initial passing glance. "Nisone," I mumbled to myself. I joked with the idea in my head that she handed me the wrong note, but still assumed it wasn't a failed attempt to say nice one, which could be taken as a compliment if you were desperate enough. Seconds into looking at the note, my eyes widened, having figured out what it meant. I jumped up, slipping to my feet, and screamed, "Yeah!" I had cracked it, only to immediately after feel completely stupid for having not figured it out sooner. My mom screamed through the door from her bedroom. "What?" I responded, "Sorry, nothing." I hurried to finish showering. Staring at my phone wearing only a towel, I smiled as I typed in NISEONE or 6473663 into the number keys. I assumed we shared the same area code, otherwise she likely would have given me a longer sequence of letters, and I was right. After 2 rings, I got an answer. "What do you want?" a disgruntled man's voice asked. Like a bad engine struggling to start in a monster movie, I clumsily belted out a response. I was looking for," an unenthusiastic female voice in the background said. "Give me the phone." "Whatever," he said, dropping the phone in front of her. "Hello?" I could recognize the voice by now. It was Abby. Trying to hide my excitement by maintaining a normal voice tone, I said, "This is James." Abby excitedly screamed and responded, "Oh my god, you figured it out." Hearing her optimistic tone, I laughed, saying, "So, why?" She interrupted, "I was hoping to find out if you figured out what you were bringing to art class." I said, "Oh," and looked around quickly around my room. I couldn't see anything immediately, so I just said, "I'll surprise you." She then replied, "Oh, come on, tell me." My eyes locked onto a plausible item for my project. "How about my bear? I'll bring my bear," I said. She replied, "Oh, okay. Oh, I have an idea. Instead of the cage, I'll bring in a stuffed animal of mine, and we'll make like a zombie bear." I laughed. "Awesome," I said. "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow, okay?" She replied happily. I answered, "Okay, bye." Just before she hung up, I could still hear her laughing, leaving me with a sense of accomplishment and a lasting smile as if it were painted across my face.